Security analyst and the director for the Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. He joins us live now from London. So, David, France has kept a force of around 5,000 troops in the Sahel, but we just keep seeing these militant attacks intensifying. Is this one more case of that old phrase, damned if you do, damned if you don't, that the violence is going to be there and it's just going to adjust to whatever force position you create?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it just reminds us of what's happening in Afghanistan.
Exactly.
But let's talk about the Sahel. What is going on? Again, you rightly said, French deployed Operation Barkhane since 2012 as a result of what happened in Libya to deal with the situation in Mali. But we haven't seen, in terms of results, the jihadist situation has gotten worse. Now, Burkina Faso is somehow, to use the word, benefiting from the insecurity that has come from Mali. So, I mean, if you look at the region, it's almost like a conclave where the Liptako Goma region is based. So Burkina Faso, they're based in a very strategic position, but this is its weakest link because you've got Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State militants in both Niger Republic and then in Mali, and they're kind of trying to block that, passage, which, unfortunately comes into the area with Burkina Faso. It's a terrible situation, and it's going to be worse, Michelle, I have to say, when French troops finally pull out. I don't know if you remember that, the Operation Barkhane has now, according to President Macron of France, it's come to an end. So we're likely to see more attacks, carried out by these jihadist groups, in this region.
And I wanted to ask you that, especially since we made a comparison to Afghanistan, because, the dynamic can be the same. Do you think that there is some parallel to Macron saying he wants to draw down troops by 2022 and the emboldening of these groups, just like we saw in Afghanistan?
I think we've got to be careful as well in terms of how we make comparisons, because
right.
The Taliban used to be a government, before it was removed by the U.S. coalition. Now, in the case of the areas in Sahel and where French troops have been operating, these are militias. These are jihadist groups in pockets of areas within that region who are clamoring for some kind of an Islamic state. Of course, they haven't had a state before. In comparison to the Taliban. I mean, if you want to call them a terrorist group or you want to call them an insurgency, it's up to you. But what I think is that when you want to draw down your troops, from a region which has been very dependent on your forces, then you've got to be very careful because you leave a very massive gap in which, terrorists can easily, fill that gap. I don't think the jihadists in that region have the capacity to overrun the government and take over power as we've seen in Afghanistan, but they can become a huge menace. And I think this region has to be very careful, especially the African Union, on how it allows these kind of gaps to occur.
And Macron has said that the presence of French troops there, he believes, prevented militants from forming a caliphate. And, there are doubts, as you pointed out, that could actually happen. But you also mentioned the terror threat to Europe. How big of a threat do you see this being beyond the environs of the Sahel? And if it is a threat, isn't now the time to add troops? What is Macron's calculus here?
I think, Macron has an interest to protect France. And I think this is what most of the Sahel regions and these countries that are experiencing this threat have to come to compromise with. It is not the duty of France to protect Burkina Faso or Mali. But when you look at what is going on in these regions, as you rightly said, there is a huge connection. It's not just about what's going on in Mali, but as we rightly have seen, how that spreads to Burkina Faso. These groups are linked to Boko Haram in northern Nigeria through Niger Republic, which shares a border with Burkina Faso. Again, from the Malian side, they have very strong affiliations with Libya. And then if you look at Libya, it also shares a boundary with Chad. And then Chad shares a boundary with Nigeria. So it's almost like the entire region of Central, West, and East Africa, with, of course, now seeing the emergence. I mean, it's been there for 4 years, we have to say, the emergence of an ISIS faction in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, the northern part. So African countries need to be very careful on how they allow these groups to foster. Now, I've seen a lot of these groups, calling on the Taliban to support them. I don't think the Taliban is going to do that because, of course, they want to clean their image after 20 years out of power. But African countries have to be really careful how these groups spread across the region.
And you wonder what this is going to look like 5 years down the road. David, a pleasure to talk to you.